Devolution is said to be a return to states' rights, since it's inferred that management of the program will be decentralized. This is a new 1990s definition of the original concept of states' rights and will prove not to be an adequate substitute. At the same time, these token efforts were made in welfare, education, and human resources reform. Congress gave the federal government massive new influence over adoption and juvenile crime, education, and medicine. Block grants to states for specific purposes after collecting the revenues at the federal level is foreign to the concept that once was understood as states' rights. This process, even if temporarily beneficial, will do nothing to challenge the underlying principle and shortcomings of the welfare state. Real battles. The real battles in the Congress are more often over power and personalities than philosophy. Both sides of most debates represent only a variation of some interventionist program. Moral and constitutional challenges are made when convenient and rights and never follow a consistent pattern. These, along with the state rights arguments, are not infrequently just excuses used to justify opposing or approving a program supported for some entirely different reason. The person who makes any effort at consistency is said to be extreme or unyielding. After giving a short speech criticizing the inconsistency of our foreign policy, another member quickly rose to his feet and used a Walter Emerson quote to criticize my effort, saying, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines." Criticizing another member for following a consistent freedom philosophy and strict adherence to the Constitution is more of an attempt to reassure the critics themselves who are uneasy with their own position. Obviously, criticizing one for consistency either means that pragmatism and inconsistency is something to be proud of, or there is little respect for the philosophy that is consistently being defended, a truth the critics are not likely to admit. Public relation debates. Oftentimes, the big debates in Congress are more public relation efforts than debates on real issues. This is certainly true when it comes to preventing foreign aid funds from being used by any organization for abortions. I agree with and vote for all attempts to curtail the use of U.S. taxpayers for abortion within or outside the United States. But many in the pro-life movement aren't interested in just denying all birth control, population control, and abortion money to everyone, and avoid the very controversial effort to impose our will on other nations. Believing money allocated to any organization or country is not fungible is naive, to say the least. The biggest problem is that many who are sincerely right to life and believe the Mexico City language restriction on foreign aid will work are also philosophic believers in internationalism, both social and military. The politics of it has allowed temporary withholding of IMF and UN funds in order to pressure the president into accepting the restrictive abortion language. Withholding these funds from the United Nations and the IMF in this case has nothing to do with the criticism of the philosophy behind the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and why the international government agencies are tax burdens on the American people. It's conceded by the majority on both sides of this debate that the UN, the IMF, the development banks, and even the funds for population control are legitimate expenditures and eventually will be funded. The question is only whether or not a public relations victory can be achieved by the radical pro-abortion supporters of the presidents or the pro-life supporters. We have at least started to debate the merits of any money at all going for population control, the United Nations or the IMF. This is where the debate should be. Even though the restrictions that the Mexico City language might place on foreign expenditures probably won't change the number of abortions around the world, the vote itself does reflect through Congress the sentiment of the American people, and therefore its importance cannot be denied. But I am convinced that if the American people had the option of whether or not to send any money at all, they would reject all the funding, making the restriction debate moot. Most would agree with the fungibility argument, even when funds are sent for reasons other than family planning and abortion, like military assistance. The amazing thing is how important the debate can appear by threatening to withhold greatly sought-after IMF funds for an argument that doesn't get to the heart of the issue. What should be debated is whether or not Congress has the moral and constitutional authority to use force to take funds from American citizens for social engineering around the world, much of which results in resentment toward America. The weak and ineffective conditions placed on foreign aid money to prevent abortions is hardly a legitimate reason for continuing the illegal funding in the first place. At times, efforts to get more swing votes to endorse Mexico City language, some pro-life forces not only won't challenge the principle of our funding for birth control and population control overseas, but believe in increasing the appropriation for the program. If the Constitutionalists cannot change the nature of the debate, we will never win these arguments. Corporatism. Congress and the administration is greatly influenced by corporate America. We truly have a system of corporatism that, if not checked, will evolve into a much more threatening form of fascism. Our welfare system provides benefits for the welfare poor, and in return, the recipients vote to perpetuate the entire system. Both parties are quite willing to continue the status quo and not questioning the authority upon which these programs are justified. But the general public is unaware of how powerful corporate America is in changing and influencing legislation. Even those programs said to be specific for the poor, like food stamps, housing, education, and medicine, have corporate beneficiaries. These benefits to corporate America are magnified when it's realized that many of the welfare redistributionist programs are so often not successful in helping the poor. But there are many other programs precisely designed to satisfy the special interests of big business. A casual observer might think the political party that champions the needs of the poor would not be getting political and financial support from the rich. But quite clearly, both parties are very willing to receive financial and political support from special interests representing the rich and the poor, business and labor, domestic and foreign. We should not expect campaign reform or reliable revelations of campaign fundraising abuse in today's political climate. There are strong bipartisan reasons to keep the debate on only a superficial level. All the rules in the world will never eliminate the motivation of or the ability of the powerful special interests to influence Congress. Loopholes and illegal contributions will plague us for as long as Congress continues with the power to regulate, tax or detax, subsidize or punish essentially everyone participating in the economy. The most we can ever hope for is to demand full disclosure. Then, if influence is bought, at least it would be in the open. The other most difficult task, and the only thing that will ever dampen special interest control of government, would be to radically reduce the power of Congress over our lives and our economy. Taxpayer funding of campaigns would prove disastrous. The special areas of the budget that are of specific benefit to corporate America are literally too numerous to count. But there are some special programs benefiting corporations that usually prompt unconditional support from both parties. The military-industrial complex is correctly recognized for its influence in Washington. This same group has a vested interest in our foreign policy that encourages policing the world, nation-building, and foreign social engineering. Big contracts are given to friendly corporations in places like Haiti, Bosnia, and the Persian Gulf region. Corporations benefiting from these programs are unable to deal objectively with foreign policy issues. And it's not unusual for these same corporate leaders to lobby for troop deployments and worldwide military intervention. The U.S. remains the world's top arms manufacturer, and our foreign policy permits the exports to world customers subsidized through the Export-Import Bank. Foreign aid, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, Export-Import Bank, IMF, World Bank, development banks are all used to continue bailouts of third world countries heavily invested in by our corporations and banks. Corporations can get special tax treatment that only the powerful and influential can achieve. For instance, pseudo-free trade legislation like NAFTA and GATT and the recent fast-track legislation shows how much big business influences both congressional leaders and the administration. While crumbs are cast to the poor with programs that promote permanent dependency and impoverishment, the big bucks go to the corporations and the banking elites. The poor welcome the crumbs, not realizing how much long-term harm the programs do, as they obediently continue to vote for a corporate-biased welfare state where the rich get richer and the poor get forgotten. Since generally both parties support a different version of interventionism, one should not expect the programs for the rich to be attacked on principle or cut in size. The result of last year's legislative session should surprise no one. Both types of welfare expenditures benefit from a monetary system that creates credit out of thin air in order to monetize congressional deficits when needed and manipulate interest rates downward to non-market levels to serve the interests of big borrowers and lenders. Federal Reserve policy is an essential element in serving the powerful special interests Monetary mischief of this type will not likely be ended by congressional action, but will be eventually stopped by market forces, just as has recently occurred in the Far East. Voluntary contracts. There is little understanding or desire in Congress to consistently protect voluntary contracts. Many of our programs to improve race relations have come from government interference in the voluntary economic contract. Government's role in a free society should be to enforce contracts, yet too often it does the opposite. All labor laws, affirmative action programs, and consumer protection laws are based on the unconstitutional authority of government to regulate voluntary economic contracts. If the same process were applied to the press, it would be correctly condemned as prior restraint and ruled unconstitutional. Throughout the 20th century, economic and personal liberties have undergone a systematic separation. Rules applying to the media and personal relationships are no longer applied to voluntary economic transactions. Some members of Congress are quite vocal in defending the First Amendment and fight hard to protect freedom of expression by cautioning against any effort at prior restraint. They can speak eloquently on why V-chip technology in the hands of the government may lead to bad things, even if proponents are motivated to protect our children from pornography. Likewise, these partial civil libertarians are quite capable of demanding the protection of all adult voluntary sexual activity. They mount respectable challenges to the social authoritarian who never hesitates to use government force to mold society and improve personal moral behavior. But these same champions of personal liberty do not hesitate at all to use the same government force they readily condemn in social matters to impose their vision of a fair and equitable economic system on all of us. Thousands of laws and regulations are on the book to guarantee equality in hiring, pay, and numerous other conditions of employment and for theoretical consumer protection. Ironically, the enemies of the voluntary contract when dealing with the media and personal associations are the best defenders of economic liberty and the voluntary economic contract. Unless this glaring inconsistency is reconciled, the republic cannot be salvaged. Too often, the two sides compromise in the wrong direction. Economic libertarians concede too much to the welfare proponents, and the social libertarians concede too much to the authoritarians who eagerly try to legislate good behavior. This willingness to compromise while at the same time criticizing those who have firm beliefs and being overly rigid serve as a serious threat to the cause of liberty. A consistent defense of all voluntary associations does not preclude laws against violence, fraud, theft, libel, and slander. To punish acts of aggression and protect nonviolent economic and social associations is the main purpose of government in a constitutional republic. Moral imperfections cannot be eliminated by government force any more than economic inequalities can be eliminated through welfare or socialist legislation. Once government loses sight of its true purpose of protecting liberty and embarks on a course where the generous use of force is used to interfere in the voluntary social and economic contracts, liberty will be diminished and the foundation of a true republic undermined. That is where we are today. The effort of both sides to do good threatens personal liberty. There is no evidence that laws designed to improve personal sexual habits, the quality of the press, or the plight of the poor have helped. The poor, under all programs of forced redistribution of wealth, always become more numerous, and the state inevitably abuses its power when it tries to regulate freedom of expression or improve personal behavior. Too often, both sides allow the principle of government force to be used to interfere in the internal affairs of other nations at a great cost and risk to American taxpayers while accomplishing little to promote a firm hatred of America for the interference. This itself is a threat to our security. The resulting conditions of international conflict are often used as the excuse to further curtail the civil liberties of all Americans. In recent years, freedom of the press has been severely challenged when we are actively involved in military operations. Our young people are threatened as they are needlessly exposed to enemy fire and medical experimentation, and there is always an economic cost through higher taxes.